folks and friends. Today I would like to address a thing that often comes up, especially among new practitioners, people who are trying to find their path when it comes to the practice of folk magic or witchcraft, broadly speaking, and that is receiving advice from teachers out there or other practitioners. The thing is, and that is very confusing, by the way, is that you will often find people giving conflicting advice or conflicting experiences or beliefs around certain things. And for example, people come to me and ask about something and mention that somebody else said or had an opinion that was completely contradictory to what I talk about, or vice versa, right? Asking me to explain why that is or how things work or who's correct versus incorrect, all that kind of stuff, right? Because you want to get to the bottom of things and understand which information is legit or what you should be trusting versus not. And the thing is that where a lot of the confusion comes from is that we need to be looking at who is giving the advice. And it's not a matter of, somebody being legit versus not, or somebody being correct versus incorrect, as much as it's the difference between people's practices and beliefs. So if you want to receive advice that is going to be valuable for you, that is going to be compatible with your craft, with your path, with your beliefs, you need to be seeking advice from people who practice in the same paradigm, a similar path as you, who have a similar practice to yours, okay? Because that is going to be the most compatible advice for you. It's going to address the things you're asking about from the perspective of somebody who perceives things through a similar lens as you, right? So for example, if you ask me about something, I will always give you my advice from the perspective of a folk practitioner, of an animist, of somebody who does not actively belong to any religion. I don't find myself to be aligned with any religion. I am non-religious in that sense. Versus if you ask somebody else, they might be coming from a perspective of a ceremonial magician or somebody who's doing Christian magic, or the grimoire tradition, or maybe some modern eclectic practice, or any type of particular tradition or path that they belong to. And with that always comes, the kind of philosophy underlying all of it, the beliefs around the spirit world and how things work and everything, right? So that's where the contradictions a lot of the times come from. If you ask somebody for advice, somebody whose practice is completely different from yours and whose beliefs are very different from yours, and especially if there's also a religion involved, you need to ask yourself if that advice is compatible with your practice and your beliefs and your religious alignment, if there is any at all, right? For example, I wouldn't be asking for advice somebody who practices Christian magic and those strains of traditions, because they are actively in conflict when it comes to the underlying beliefs, values, ethics, everything, with the kind of craft that I practice. And now, does that mean that somebody from that path is incorrect, or that their advice is false? Not at all. The thing is that their advice would be best applied to the practice of somebody who is on a similar path as them. So for example, right, somebody who finds themselves to be Christian and practicing Christian magic and perceiving things through that lens, and through, being an active worshiper of the deity of that faith, right? Whereas for me, the ethics of that are not something that I am aligned with. On the contrary, right? The perception of that deity is very different from a person who worships that deity and so on. I'm just mentioning these things on like a surface level because I really don't want to get into the all nitty gritty of that. That's not the point of this particular video, but I'm trying to point at this fundamental difference in the approach and the perception of certain things that just cannot be readily accepted by a practitioner from, like different conflicting paths and expecting some kind of cohesion, because you just won't find it there, right? And it's not just a thing when it comes to magical practice, but in a similar vein, you wouldn't be asking for like a religious advice from somebody who is part of a completely different faith than you are. And even on a cultural level, you wouldn't be asking somebody from a very distant culture from your own to tell you how you should be approaching your own culture, right? Or vice versa. These things just cannot be compared one to one and treated as compatible with each other. So again, if you are new to the practice of witchcraft or magic of any strain, always make sure that you are seeking advice from people whose worldview, broadly speaking, and whose practice is similar to yours. And I'm not saying that you should only have like a one person that you always turn to. It's always good to compare, to question the things you are told, to seek other sources, to compare what others think or say, if you want to have like a broader perspective on things, right? Because there's just no way one person can actually give you like a whole overview of something. There's always going to be a subjective element to it, and that's normal and that's to be expected. But when you are cross-comparing other people's experiences, personal gnosis, advice, opinions, all of that, always make sure that it's compatible with you. You are the home base for what makes sense for you. It's always good practice to be aware of what's out there, of what other people think or how other people approach things. But that is more of a again, like broadening of perspective and not necessarily something that you have to apply to yourself. So if somebody comes to you as a practitioner of a completely different paradigm or completely different tradition and tells you that something you do is incorrect, or you shouldn't be approaching things in this particular way because it's not going to work, or maybe it's unsafe or whatever else, always ask yourself, does this person's experience, expertise, and opinion have anything to do with my practice and my beliefs? Is it compatible? We always need to take into consideration that people don't always consider this as an important factor. And there are, of course, people out there who like to preach about their approach and consider it to be the only correct way to do things, and that anybody who does things differently or approaches their magical practice from a different lens is doing it wrong, right? You need to be aware that people like that are out there, and personally, I try to avoid having interactions with people like that because I am personally not looking to like convert anybody to anything or convince anybody that I'm right and they are wrong or vice versa. I'm not interested in that kind of discourse. I think there's place for everybody, and that the kind of conversations that actually enrich us as practitioners are the ones that are respectful of each other's perspectives, that make space for the nuance that comes with that difference in perspective, when both parties are aware where these differences stem from, that is when you can actually find a lot of room for mutual growth and learning from each other. You don't need to adapt somebody else's perspective if it's not compatible with your worldview, but it gives you an idea of how they perceive things. And I think it can be very enriching if we are aware of these things. So if you are fresh, always make sure that you inquire about the person's approach. If they are to give you advice, just make sure that it's actually something that is usable for you and that makes sense for your practice, because it not always does, right? So it's nice to be aware of that. And this is helpful if you want to avoid, being disappointed, frankly, but also just wasting your time on something that is just not part of your practice. It's not something that you can incorporate. So yeah, stay safe out there. Always be curious, always be inquisitive, always make sure that you know where your boundaries are and what's actually applicable to your situation, to your craft. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully see you around soon.